Ready to change gear? Are you in the market for a camera, lens or accessory? Visit mpb.com to browse thousands of items that are always authentic and more affordable. Upgrade your setup today.
Hello and welcome to the AV Forums podcast for Monday, the 22nd of January, 2024. I'm Phil Hinton. Welcome along to our CES special, and I'm joined on this episode by Andy, Ian, and Jules. Good evening, guys.
Yeah.
Hi, Phil.
Right, so what we're going to do in this podcast, we're going to talk about CES. And first of all, I need to thank our CES sponsor, who was MPB. You've just seen a trail for them at the start of the podcast. They helped us out this year by obviously sponsoring the event and our coverage, but also loaning us some video gear so we could up our production a little bit. So we used a Lumix S5iix. That was a camera body, and we used a couple of professional lenses. That was a full frame camera. So I've gone from micro four thirds, because we use Panasonic cameras in all of our videos, and the GH6 is the one that I use the most at the moment, GH5 for a B camera. But on this occasion, we used the full frame S5 Mark IIX. Stonking camera. Really like it. The lenses were fantastic, and because it's full frame, we're able to get some really nice shallow depth of field shots. And I even took it out to the desert and did some photography with it and took some photographs and so on. And the level of depth and everything. So fantastic camera, and you can win it. You can win the camera body. MPB are kind enough to be giving that away, so it's roughly worth about £2,000 for this body only. You'll have to sort yourself out with lenses and so on, but it's a great start into the hobby if you like photography, or you want to be a videographer or start your own YouTube channel, whatever. It's a cracking camera to do that. So head over to AV Forums, head over to the competitions and enter that. You can win that camera. If you're watching on YouTube, the link will be in the description as well. So yeah, thank you very much to MPB for their help in producing our CES content this week, or this past week, and you can win the camera. Go and enter that now. So what are we talking about this podcast? Well, all the major manufacturers made some kind of announcement or other at CES in terms of TV and display technology. So we're going to talk about that in this podcast. We might even touch on a couple of AV products as well, which I think will be of real interest. One is not a sound bar, but it's a speaker to use with your TV. So, you can join the dots there, TVs to speakers and so on. And the other one's SVS, who are big on the forums. They made a big announcement. It wasn't supposed to be a big announcement. It was supposed to be a soft launch, but once the cat was out of the bag, everybody wanted to know about the new SVS speaker. So we'll touch on that as well. We are also no longer live streaming the podcast going forward this year. We'll give you the full details in terms of what we're going to do with the podcast this year. They are going to split out into different categories and so on. We'll discuss that at the end of the podcast. But if you want to ask us questions or you want to leave feedback, you can do that in two ways. You can either send us an email to podcast@avforums.com, or you can go to this thread on AV Forums, go to this podcast, leave a comment in the thread, or leave, if you're on YouTube, in the description, underneath the description in the comment section, leave your comments there. Andy does a great job of collating all the questions, going through them, and then in the next podcast, we will go through them and answer them. So if you've got any questions or whatever, then get them in there, and you'll pick up on those and let us know, and we'll answer them in the next podcast. So more of that a little bit later. So CES, what is it? Well, it is the largest consumer electronics show on the planet. It has been for nearly 100 years. The CTA have certainly been around in some guise during that time. There's always been a show. 1978 was the year that it moved to Las Vegas, and it's been there ever since. Every January, the year kicks off with the biggest trade show on the planet, and all the manufacturers use that as a platform to launch their products for the year ahead. It's certainly been that way for a long time, up until the late 2000s. There was even some major companies by the likes of names of Apple and Microsoft got involved before they splintered off and started doing their own thing. So it's always been a massive show. It would take you an entire week just to get round all of the halls and all of the stands. And even then, that's just having a brief glimpse of what's on the stand before moving on to the next one. So you really got to plan your visit. The great thing is that most manufacturers tend to stay in the same spot year on year. So you can generally build up a sort of map in your head of where everybody is to navigate and get around. Before the show opens, it's a trade show. It's not open to the public. You have to be a member of the trade in some way. But that still brings in about 250,000
God.
people during the week. So that gives you an idea of just how big that show is. And then navigating the show floor, navigating the crowds and everything is a real
And
issue.
getting lunch, Phil.
Well, the trick there,
Huge queues.
Jules, is not to get lunch and not to. So for many years, we stayed on the strip. We stayed in a hotel and we'd get the monorail in and so on. But what would happen is you would spend 3 hours, 4 hours of your day in a queue of some kind, which obviously then impacts on who you can go and see and what you can do. So for the last few years, I'm not going to give the competition any ideas, but for the last few years, we ain't been staying on the strip. We've had our car. A lot of these manufacturer events are usually held in private suites off of the show floor. So they'll have the big stand on the show floor, but specific areas like TV launches and that kind of thing, they'll have a hotel suite somewhere or a conference room or a ballroom or whatever. And it's an invite only into those areas for the press and so on. So luckily enough, we've always been invited into those areas. We always get access to that. But it does mean traveling from hotel to hotel. If you were trying to do that without a hire car, if you're trying to get a taxi or whatever, it would take you all day getting from hotel to hotel and then sitting in CES traffic and so on. What you tend to do is you tend to get an idea of where things are, the easiest way to get there, and how to avoid the traffic to get around. So yeah, it's a massive event.
So is it back up to the pre-pandemic levels then?
I was just going to come on to that, Andy. Yeah, last year, a bit of a strange year last year because it wasn't quite as busy as I thought it was going to be. And I think that was just people still being a little bit cautious. A lot of the UK PR teams and regional PR teams didn't travel. It was mainly the global offices that were there last year. I think some of that was strategy on the company's parts in terms of don't bring all your staff over in case everybody catches something and then it knocks the entire marketing team out for the whole globe. So there was that aspect. There was aspect of people kind of still staying away because of COVID, not really sure if they should go to an event like that. This year it was a total right. Let's just get on with it. Let's get back to business, and it was heaving. There was the Tuesday, the first day of the show, actually opening to the trade, was almost impossible to get around the show floor. It was so busy, just throngs of people everywhere. We shot a couple of videos on the Tuesday. One was with TCL on their stand, and normally we'd do a walk around with Marek, and we were going to use our little Osmo Pocket 3 and have a proper physical walk around. It was so busy, we just had to do static shots and make sure that people didn't get into frame. It was so busy that day. So yeah, to answer your question, Andy, definitely back to pre-pandemic. Probably the busiest I've seen the show since about 2020. Absolutely chock-a-block.
So no signs of it losing relevance then?
No, it's still very much a relevant show. I'll come back onto that question a little bit when we talk about Sony, because some companies are changing their strategy slightly. I think it's more to fit with their product cycle rather than losing interest in CES, because they still had a massive stand there. They still were showing a lot of interest in things. They didn't launch their TVs. So what we're finding is that companies are changing strategies slightly, but CES is still absolutely relevant. More and more relevant if you're a startup as well. And a lot of the halls, certainly the ones towards the Westgate Hotel, which used to be the International Hotel, so the one that's famous for Elvis having been, playing there every year and so on. That's right next to the convention center. It's got a huge convention area that was full of Far East startup companies and so on. The West Hall, which is a big new hall, it's only been open a few years. It was full of EV technology, sensors. John Deere had all their farm equipment. I mean, like massive combine harvesters right in the middle of the show floor. So it's starting to break out into different areas. So central halls, mainly your big manufacturers like TCL, Hisense, LG, and all them companies are central hall, and then the halls off from there are your smaller companies, but with interest in technology. And like I say, it would take you the whole week to get around everything in the convention centers, and then you've also then got the Venetian, which is your high-end hi-fi and audio side of things. You've also got little tech park areas. You've got tents outside. It's just massive, absolutely massive.
Are you seeing more of an ingress of gaming companies now that what was the big gaming show that's now deceased called
E3, wasn't it?
E3. So are you seeing any of that?
There is certainly more gaming stuff, and I'm trying to remember which hall it was. I think it's North Hall. Had a lot more of the gaming peripherals and that type of thing, and sort of offshoots of VR. Sony did a big VR, obviously a big VR thing on their stand with PlayStation. So yeah, I mean, there was a big section of Sony's stand was devoted to PlayStation and games. Last of Us 2 was on there. I wasn't allowed to film anything. I got stopped twice from walking around the stand with the camera out because we weren't allowed to see screen grabs from that. So yeah, there is more of that, and of course there's more of a crossover now. We're talking about display technology and so on. That's a big part of things now is the gaming side of things. So yeah, there's a lot more of that. I don't know if you picked up on anything, Ian, from this side. You see, this is another thing when you're on the show floor, unless you know what you're going to go and look at, or you discover something, it's very difficult to keep up with what's actually going on. You're actually better being away from the show if you want a wider overview of what's going on. So Ian, anything that popped up?
In the gaming sector, no, I mean, for me, a lot of it, because it's more tech based, a lot of it's more to do with PC technology, the monitors like you mentioned, VR, AR, that kind of thing. So it's more sort of hardware based rather than the kind of the general console gaming. Because I mean, you mentioned like Sony and Philips, the likes of companies that are sort of doing their own thing. Gaming developers or gaming publishers, they tend to have the similar kind of mindset these days as well, where they, it's the case of if you want to be heard, don't shout when everybody else is shouting. Stand aside, do your own thing. Which is why, like last night, Microsoft had the developer direct presentation, sort of showing off some of their games. So they do tend to kind of stand out from the crowd by doing their thing. So for me, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of interesting technology, but yeah, not so much the games. Like I say, it's more of the tech side. But there's a lot going on.
Yeah. So it wasn't any different this year in terms of, CES was CES, back to normal. So let's kick off and get into some of the nitty gritty of what we actually saw, what I saw on the show floor, what was announced at the show, what might be interesting to you in terms of TV and display news. And again, we'll touch on a little bit AV at the end. So we're going to start with Samsung. Samsung always have their first look event the evening before press day. So press day was Monday. So this was Sunday evening at Caesar's Palace, up in one of the ballrooms up there. They'd taken over that area. The last time I did this with Samsung, there was no press conference or anything. It was basically they opened the door and you walked on to the stand that they'd created, and there was no information about anything you were looking at. It was basically TVs and speakers and all sorts, but nobody had introduced it. Nobody had told you what was what. And the people on the show floor were not that informed about what it was that you were looking at. So it was a bit frustrating last year. I think that feedback got back to Samsung because this year there was a press conference before we kicked off. So, we had the VIPs from Samsung coming on stage and telling us exactly what their plan was for the year ahead, what they were releasing in terms of TVs and so on. So this was a TV display event. So we had QD-OLED, we had QLED, 8K. Samsung's still making a big thing of 8K. They're the only company that is. They've invested quite a bit of money in it. The problem with 8K and the problem that has been around for 8K is light transmission. So when you're talking about pixel pitch and so on a 4K TV, it's a lower pixel pitch than on an 8K TV because you've got more pixels that need to go into an 8K TV. When you're then talking about a QLED, so an LCD TV with a backlight, the light has to get through. And the more pixels you have and the more dense your pixels are packed, the less light that gets through. So what you actually find is that with a 4K Neo QLED TV is probably twice as bright as an 8K because it can get more light through. And then the problem with 8K is that they then try to boost the light output. And by doing that, you up the energy consumption, which then falls foul of the EU guidelines when it comes to energy consumption. So this is why 8K has become such a hot potato, and people have dropped it other than Samsung, because the energy consumption is such that it breaks EU rules. And they are trying to figure out how they get around that. So
Not looking
technically
good for
that's
16K TV then, is it?
well, that's it. I mean, what you want is a self-emitting technology like micro LED or OLED. So this is where the problem is for 8K. But Samsung really are still pushing it. Their flagship QN900D was the star of the show as far as they were concerned. The Z95D QD-OLED was there. It was in a 77, 65, and 55-inch screen size. Not that big a song and dance about that. They really want to push QLED. They still see QLED as their flagship TV and flagship technology, basically because your APL is brighter. So that's your average picture level. So the average picture brightness is much more on an LCD than it is on an OLED. OLED, when you're talking about 100% bright, so that's a screen that is showing a 100% brightness field, is far dimmer than an LED LCD TV, just because OLED can't keep that brightness up. It can do it for a few seconds and then it will fade because it's not capable. So that's the difference between the technologies. Samsung see mini LED QLED as the technology for HDR. It's a message that Sony have picked up on this year as well, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. So that was their push. So QLED was foremost in their presentations. It had the largest section of the first look area. It looks like an impressive TV. It's beautifully built. The design's lovely. And I've always liked the Samsung QLED designs. I think they are a nice monolith design. They are slightly thinner this year, so not as thin as OLED, but again, a thinner chassis. The sound system on there is again at the sides and edges of the panel to give you that wide immersive sound. There's lots of nice technology on there. The processing they are saying is far more advanced this year with AI, and everybody's talking about AI in the processing this year. So it's a nice looking TV. 8K is probably not going to be a thing, even though Samsung really want to push it. But the 4K TVs will certainly be worth looking at this year, and we will be getting them through for review as soon as they're released. And again, the dimming technology is getting better. Samsung are getting better at what they're doing with the local dimming. The problem with HDR and local dimming is that, and Jules, you'll be able to help me explain this one as well, is that when we're talking about screen nits and screen brightness, you're not talking about the 100% full brightness of that screen when it comes to HDR. What you're talking about is what we call specular highlights or peak brightness. And that is a very small area of the screen the one time. So you're talking about 3% coverage of the screen when you're talking about peak brightness. I think people misunderstand this, mistake this, and think that when you're talking about 3000 nits, you're talking about the brightness of the full screen. That's not the case. Even with a powerful LED LCD TV, you're still only talking about 500, 600 nits of the full screen brightness. And when it comes to OLED, you're talking about 200 to 250 on the very best panels. So yeah, you're talking about a very, very small area. And the problem with LED LCD TVs and local dimming is that they use zones. And if you have a very bright, small object against a dark background, you then get blooming around that object because it's not a per pixel. It's actually a zone. And that zone will go into the black area. It won't just cover the small white area or bright area. It will go into the black area. And that's how you get blooming and you get clouding and so on. And it's an artifact of LCD technology because of the way that the backlight works.
Yeah.
And the way they get around that is blooming suppression. Jules, which does?
Well, you've given a very good explanation of the problem. And the very fact that an OLED being self-emissive, the pixels can do that on a much finer level and retain black at the same time. And that's the problem with these dimming zones. And you can if you're trying to suppress your blooming, you're going to probably end up bringing down the peak highlight of that zone itself as well. So
Yeah.
it can be a very mixed affair. And of course, the other problem is perceptually, everything we see is measured against black. Black is your absolute, it's always zero. So you can get 5,000 nit TVs, 10,000 nit TVs, you can push the brightness, but what is happening to your black floor
Yeah.
as you're doing that? And you can't effectively suppress it with a dimming zone in the same way that, for example, an OLED can.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So perceptually, as Jules says,
Mhm.
on an OLED, because the black is black, that's what gives you that
Mhm.
absolute dynamic range. You may get more brightness potentially out of a LCD TV, but what happens is, because you're talking about such a small zone, it does dim that zone down, which
Yeah.
tries to get rid of the blooming.
Yeah.
And in doing that, it affects the dynamic
Peak.
range, and
Yeah.
it lowers the dynamic range. And what you do is you then compress what that set's actually capable of. So it might be capable of 5,000 nits, but if it can't display the 3% area of that screen any brighter than that, then your dynamic range is that.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
not this.
And I don't know whether you've seen, obviously, Phil, examples of moving objects, a white object against
Yeah.
a black background, and see how it moves from zone to zone, and it dims as it crosses from
Yeah.
zone to zone to zone.
Well,
So
that's how
Yeah.
when we're reviewing these sets, that's how we count the
Mhm.
zones. We have a little block. It's a test
Mhm.
pattern that goes across horizontally, and then it comes down vertically, and
Mhm.
you're able to count each zone because it will pulse as it goes over the zones.
and
So-
that speaks to the whole marketing of HDR displays. There's so much stress on peak output, and we've heard, obviously, this week at CES, 10,000 nit displays, 5,000 nit displays, but we have to remember that HDR is high dynamic range, and it's just what you've said. It's dynamic range is it's fundamentally contrast.
Mhm.
So you can push 10,000, you can push 5,000, but if you are at the same time unable to keep black at zero, you actually haven't increased your dynamic range, because
Yeah.
the brightness increases, the black level increases proportionately to the peak output as well.
Exactly.
So it's brighter, but it's not increased in dynamic range. So that's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is misunderstood quite a
Mm.
bit, even within the industry. So I think it's an important point to make. Now, that's not saying that these TVs are not good. They are. They're very, very good. And when the algorithm works well, then it can look good. It can look very good. And if you're in a bright room and your black floor is raised anyway because you've got lots of ambient light, it's not as big a problem.
So just for clarification then, Phil, so the blooming that you've just described, how would that manifest itself in the pictures? So from what you've said, am I right in assuming that, for example, if you've got a person holding a candle in a dark cave, as they move across the screen, the candle flame, rather than being a distinct item on the screen, there's a halo or a glow around it, and it spreads out. It's not very well defined, and that's the blooming from the zones.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a scene that I use in John Wick 4, which is a Rolls Royce in the dark pulling up outside the hotel, and on the far side of the picture is street lamps, which should be really quite bright, and that's another good test, is to see, because the camera is moving as well. It's a good test to see on an LED LCD TV the blooming suppression, because they should be bright, because they're small areas, and they're not. And when you do a side-by-side comparison with an OLED, that's the most distinct thing that you can see, is that the OLED, even though it hasn't got the same peak brightness capabilities, the dynamic range, the actual visual dynamic range, is so much more than this LCD TV because of the blooming suppression. So it is an issue, and it's one we're going to come back to with Sony, because Sony think they've managed to improve this area, if not completely eradicate it. So we'll come back to that a bit later on. So that was QLED from Samsung, and again, QLED is their big technology. QD-OLED, third generation. So I'm briefly going to talk about Samsung display, just so you go and watch the video, because it's another interesting interview with Samsung display. And again, to explain this for those who are maybe not aware, Samsung Electronics are a completely different company to Samsung Display. Samsung Display are the company who make the panels, who the manufacturers of the panels. They do not make the TVs. So they produce the panels and then they sell them, a bit like LG Display, exactly the same setup. They sell the panels to the industry. So they will sell the panels to Samsung Electronics, and it's Samsung Electronics who then build the consumer TVs that you go out and buy. So go and have a look at the video with Samsung Display. They come up with the technology. They're now using the new Pico printing technique to get the QD-OLED technology. So basically, in a quick explanation, so QD-OLED is blue OLED light. It then has a layer of QD quantum dots on top, which are red and green. And it's these this filter and then the blue light. So the blue light gets filtered out into blue, and then it also gives the light for red and green. That's how the technology basically works. I mean, it's a lot more technical than that, but to make these quantum dots, and because the quantum dots, that gives you an idea of just how tiny these things are. They have developed a new printing technology where 99.99% of the time they will get exactly the right amount of quantum dot material into each pixel. And they say that this has improved not only the color volume, but also the brightness, and they can now hit 3000 nits of peak brightness. But again, we're talking about a 3% area of the screen. And again, you're not talking about a white balance that's anywhere near accurate. So a white balance that would be accurate would be D65. You're talking about D93 here. So you're talking about a very blue light and very bright light. But they are saying that they can measure 3000 nits. So it's another big step up. It was 1500 nits last year. So they've doubled it. You know, they've improved that. So again, excited about that because it's third gen QD-OLED. Why are we excited about QD-OLED? Because technically it's an RGB display. And Jules, RGB display is what is used across the industry in terms of
Absolutely
content production and so on, because it is so accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed actually from your video, Phil, that there was a section that showed a grading monitor, the Flanders Scientific.
Flanders, yeah.
And that is something that pre-CES or around the time of CES, Flanders announced a new QD-OLED 31.5-inch grading monitor, the XMP 310, I think it is, from memory. And that's supposed to be hitting 1,000 nits, and that sells for £10,000. And it's based on that QD-OLED, as we saw in the actual video that you put up there as well. They've also got a 55-inch one as well, which hits 2,000 nits. And that's actually, those are calibrated. I believe those are D65 measures as well. And they obviously put their own processing behind it, etc. But they are Samsung Display's panels, as was mentioned in that. So QD-OLED is starting to come into grading studios. The Sony BVMX 300 was a hell of a lot more expensive. That was an RGB OLED panel. You can't get that anymore. Sony have stopped making those RGB OLEDs for grading, but people still want, graders still want that black level capability. They want that contrast, that color volume. And so Flanders picking up these Samsung Displays panels, producing these grading monitors, offering them at a cheaper price, £10,000 and £20,000. Still expensive, obviously, but £10,000 starts to come into the pocket price of some sort of small independent studios, and so you might see QD-OLED increasingly making waves in color grading.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a very interesting section of the stand. And they did have a Sony mastering one. I think it was a 310, X310, hidden behind a panel. So it was just showing the screen. But if you know that display, you know what you're looking for. So they were, benchmarking that against the new third generation QD-OLED, and it looked very, very good, very accurate. So I'm looking forward to seeing not only Samsung Electronics S95D, but also Sony will be using that panel, I believe, as well. Right.
Sorry, Phil, just to jump in there. So the Samsung Electronics, well, what's their take on QD-OLED as a brand, as a marketing exercise? Are they taking that from Samsung Display? Obviously, Samsung Display are using QD-OLED as a branding. or as the description of the technology. What are Samsung Electronics doing with it? Because
It's
the
mixed.
S95D has a range, has a bit of a mix across its
it's mixed, Andy, and this is going to cause problems for the consumer, I think, because what you're talking about there is the S95D range is QD-OLED. The S90D is also QD-OLED, but only at certain screen sizes, because Samsung Display only make QD-OLED at certain screen sizes. So what you're talking about is 55, 65, 77 will be QD-OLED. The 42, the 48, and the 83-inch are LG OLED panels that are in that TV. So that's a WRGB OLED, so completely different to QD OLED. They look different, white looks different on them. So in terms of what the consumer's looking at, they need to be careful here, because it's just being marketed as OLED. They're not differentiating between QD OLED and OLED or WRGB OLED. It's one product line, but it uses two different types of panels depending on the screen size. So if it's 42, 48, and 83, it's an LG display. It has to be LG display because Samsung Display don't make QD OLED at those sizes. So that was quite easy to differentiate. There is another line from Samsung. I'm not sure if it's going to come to the UK or not. Nobody was able to confirm at the time, which is the S85D. And again, it's using LG OLED panels, like LG display, even at 65 inches. So it's not using QD OLED. It's a step down OLED model. So it's using LG display.
So Samsung Electronics are not using QD OLED as a description on their branding at all?
No. But again, it's mixed, because they will use it in some of the description stuff that I read. It differentiated between QD and OLED, but whether the consumer gets that or not, I don't know.
Well,
sounds murky for the consumer, that.
Yeah.
The guy you interviewed from Samsung, sorry, I can't remember his name, but was obviously talking about the benefits of QD OLED. So it is going to be, the color volume is obviously significant in comparison to the WRGB LG displays models. It's going to be difficult for consumers as you say, to differentiate which one am I getting here. So it's going to be very confusing.
Yeah, at the moment they need to have that forward knowledge, which we're giving them, but whether they get this information is another thing. We can tell them that definitely the 42, 48, and 83 are LG display, because Samsung don't make those. Samsung Display don't make those screen sizes. But whether they then swap out 55, 65, 77 is another thing. I hope they wouldn't, but you never know. You never know with companies. At the end of the day, they want to sell product. So that could be an issue there. Right, let's quickly move on. MicroLED was at the show again. MicroLED is the savior of TV. It's miles away. In terms of yield, in terms of actually getting the price down on this technology and getting it to match, because what you're talking about is modular displays, certainly at larger screen sizes, still seems to be a big issue. In terms of the manufacturer side of things, they are working on it. R&D is working on it. There was a couple of new screen sizes announced, 76, I want to say, and 101, I think, off the top of my head. And they joined the other roster of screens that you can already go out and purchase. But you're talking six figures to buy this technology. It's mega expensive. It's for super yacht owners. At this moment in time, certainly the 140-inch, I think, is about £200,000. So that gives you an idea of where this technology is. But every time I see it, I just think, wow, this is the holy grail, because it's everything that OLED is, and it's everything that LED LCD is, all in one. You have the brightness of LED LCD without the blooming suppression needing to be added, because you got, organic per pixel display here with the same black levels and dynamic range of OLED. It's stunning technology. It's just mega expensive, and it's still 5 years away, I would say, maybe even more than that, maybe 7 years before it starts to get down to any kind of affordability. And even then, you're still talking about probably about £10,000 a TV at that point. It's going to be expensive
before you retire, then, Phil.
What's that? Sorry,
you might get one before you retire, then.
Maybe get to see one and review one before then. But yeah, it's amazing technology. If you want to see it, Harrods have a 200-inch setup in their TV department. I think there's another couple of sites in the UK that have them on display. If you get an opportunity, go have a look at it, because it is phenomenal technology and it looks amazing. But you need very, very deep pockets or be a Premiership footballer to afford one of these things. Interestingly, they were also showing transparent micro LED, again for signage and commercial use and that kind of thing, and that was really interesting to see as well. These concepts, you know, you think, wow, and then you think, well, what are you actually going to use it for? You know, it's answering a question that hasn't been asked really, but yeah. So that was also interesting to see that. Tizen has had an update, so that's Samsung Smart TV system. It's been awful for the last couple of years. I just have to be honest. As an OS system, it has been absolutely awful. It now looks like every other OS system. It now performs like every other OS system. They've ironed out the bugs. They've made it more user friendly, and it's going to be updated across quite a bit of the Samsung range. Even if your TV is a couple of years old, you will get the new version of Tizen. It will roll out eventually, and going forward, all Samsung TVs will get the updates as the updates become available for Tizen. So that's good. It's rolling out for everybody. It's nice to know if you're buying into a technology that there's the possibility of upgrades, but never go and buy a TV on the possibility of upgrades, because they might never happen. Don't ever buy a product thinking that it's going to get updated, because, you know, you have to trust people that they're going to come through on the word, and we have seen a lot of people being burnt in the past. So don't buy a product based on that. But Samsung are saying they're going to update it. Fingers crossed that is the case. And it'd be nice to see, if you do invest in a product, that it is or will be given updates. So hardware dependent, it can run the new system. And then finally, I had a look around the Samsung stand. Very large stand, very impressive stand. Go watch the stand video, and you can see all the other technology that Samsung was showing off. There's white goods. There's this little robot that will run your life for you and teach you yoga and all that kind of thing. So lots of things to see on the Samsung stand. Go check out that video. So that wraps up Samsung. Let's move to their main rival, which is LG. LG also did a lot of pre-show events. So on press day, rather than going to the press conference, I went to their LG suite, 30-minute demos. So it was compressed in terms of time, but I managed to get up close with the new M4 OLED TV. So that's the one with the transmitting box. So it transmits wirelessly to the TV, and you can get rid of all your cable runs and all the rest of it. It's identical almost in all aspects to the new G4. So this has the new MLA panel, MLA 2.0 with Meta technology, although LG Electronics will not call it MLA, and they won't call it Meta for whatever reason. They tried to explain it and it never makes sense to me, but they won't use the name that LG Display use and Philips use and Panasonic use and who are using this panel, but LG don't want to talk about that. But it is the new
Are they sticking with Evo then as a description for their?
Yes, it's Evo. Yeah, that's their terminology. But Evo is not the panel. Evo is the whole package. So it's the panel and the processor and so on.
Yeah.
So the processor has been updated. I got told off in my best 4Ks of CES 2024 video because I didn't talk in detail about the new processor, the A11 processor. That's because I haven't tested it yet, and I could talk about the hype side of things, but I tend not to do that with CES. Our videos from CES are manufacturers hyping their products. It's their opportunity to tell you about what's coming up this year, and it's my job and our job at AV Forums to then test it and see if that actually marries up with what they say at the beginning of the year. So that's why in these videos, I'm not going to stand there like some YouTubers and proclaim that this is the best product since sliced bread, because I haven't seen the product other than on a show floor. I haven't had time to spend with it. So you'll get our opinions when we have spent quality time with retail samples and not pre-production and covered in marketing and so on. So that's why I didn't cover that in any great detail in a wrap-up video. We'll test that when the products come through. So G4 and M4 are the flagship TVs. G4 looks like an incremental improvement. Again, people said I wasn't being positive enough about that TV. Look, it's going to be a great TV. G3 was our TV of the year last year, not just for the panel, but for everything else about that TV. It was a great all-rounder. I have no doubt that the G4 is going to be an incremental improvement over that. You're going to get more peak brightness. They're saying 3000 nits, but again, that's a 3% window, 3% of the screen, and not in an accurate white balance. So it's going to be D93 or even more than that. But this is what they're saying. So great. Can't wait to get these TVs in. LG are usually the first TV, so a couple of months I'll be getting that TV in, or those TVs in. We will test them. M4 is now available in a 65-inch screen size, which I think's a bit of a game changer for that TV, because it was only available 77 and 83 previously. Or did it go up to 93?
97.
I can't quite remember. It was 97, was it?
97,
yeah, I think it did. But we get 65 this year, which is, that's a big step up, because that's more popular screen size, certainly in the UK. It gives you access to that technology if that's what you want. So those are two great TVs. And then, of course, the C series. Oh, before we move on, now my biggest complaint, there were two big complaints about the G3. One was the plastic remote control. It stays. It hasn't been replaced as far as I'm aware. The remotes that we're using on the show floor was still the same plastic remote control. So sadly, it doesn't look like we're going to get anything more fancy than that. But my other big complaint was a stand. So G series, the gallery series, only came with a wall mounting bracket in the box. If you wanted a stand, you had to pay, I think it was £100 from LG for the stand to sit that TV on. Now, this is their flagship TV. And my feedback to them last year was, come on, guys, this is your flagship TV. Not everybody's going to wall mount it. People are going to want to put it on a TV stand or a TV rack. You need to give them a stand. So the good news is, depending on where you live, because there will be slight variances country to country, but there is now a stand. It's a nice pedestal central stand. The other thing is, it doesn't have a lean back like previous stands for the G series. So it's a nice vertical stand. And depending on where you live, they couldn't quite confirm exactly the UK spec, but I believe it will be what they call a SKU difference, so SKU, which is basically the code for the product. There'll be two slightly different products. One will be the wall mount, one will be the stand mount, and you choose the product that you want. So you're not buying a TV with an expensive wall bracket if you don't need the wall bracket. So I think that's good news for G4. Anyway, moving on.
You have to know which approach you want before you commit to your SKU.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fantastic wall mount, and it sits right up against the wall, and it's great. But not everybody wants to wall mount the TV, so paying another £100 on top of what is a premium product was a bit of a yeah. Anyway, C series is the main thrust of LG's lineup. It always has been. It's always been the sweet spot. It's a little bit brighter this year. There are no sort of real differences other than AI is now getting a bit of an update on that as well. The AI picture processing side of things and so on.
So with the Alpha 9 processor, then
it's Alpha 9 processor in that. It's Alpha 11 in the flagship TVs. But it has had an update to the AI, like I say, Andy, and a few other little updates here and there. Nice incremental changes again. Is it going to be worth the upgrade over the C3? We'll be able to tell you that when we get in for review. But again, it's their big seller. It's the sweet spot in the range, and it looks good again. The slight differences in terms of the design and so on, which is quite nice. So unfortunately, that didn't come across on camera. And again, it was like a half-hour demo session, and then we were kicked out of the room for the next group to come through. So it was quite difficult, and there wasn't one on the main stand to have a closer look at either. So, but again, that should be dropping around about April. So we'll certainly get a review of that as soon as that model arrives. And if you want to see the stand, I actually got a pre-stand tour before the show opened, which was great because I went back to have a look once the show had opened, and there was no way I was going to produce a video the same way as I had when there was nobody on the stand, because it was absolutely packed out. You couldn't get close to much of the technology on show. So yeah, go check out that video. It's a full tour of their stand, which was really quite funky. They had dancing robots and everything. It was It was really entertaining, and a lot of the technology, and the main thing on that stand as well, and the big TV for me, again, it's one where you think, well, what is the use case? Oh, back at the use case, it looks great, it looks fantastic, and that's transparent OLED. They did a demonstration on the front of that stand, and my God, it was great. It was fantastic. Is it useful for anybody? Absolutely not.
No.
You wouldn't have it in your living room. Why would you? But and it's going to cost a shed load of money because it's a signature product, and these things always do. I mean, the roll up and roll down was 100 grand, that TV. So I don't think it'll be as expensive as that, but again, it's going to be for your Premiership footballers. It's going to be more of a commercial solution, is what I'd say. It's going to be used in hotels and that kind of thing, or separating different rooms in a restaurant or whatever, and you can have a fake fish tank, and you can see the other side, and it really was fantastic to look at and play around with, but absolutely useless in terms of an actual usable consumer product. I would
Could
say,
be cheaper to just buy a fish tank.
Probably, Andy, probably. But again, it was fun. And the thing for me that made it amazing, and I had to keep watching it, was when the black backing comes down and makes it transparent, suddenly your eye treats what's on the screen differently, and it suddenly has this depth. So they had an app which was a fish tank, and it looked like a screensaver where the black backing was up. And as soon as that black backing came away, it suddenly looked like a fish tank with depth, because your brain fills in the gap. And that was fantastic. That was amazing to see. I had to watch that a couple of times and move off to the side to see if it made any difference or whatever. And that effect was brilliant. So if they could manipulate that effect in some way and produce more applications for it that make use of that depth aspect, then it's probably got some really useful commercial uses. And it's great to see companies thinking out the box, because when they produce things like this, sometimes they come upon something that they haven't thought about or nobody's thought about, and it becomes the next big product. So I would never say to companies, don't bother doing this kind of thing because it's useless. None of it's useless. It'll have some use further down the line, and they have to develop this stuff to find out what works and what doesn't work. But there was aspects of it that were absolutely brilliant. Really was good. So,
did you get a chance to look at it with the black background, what it was actually like as a TV?
yeah,
if you were
and
to watch films in it, would it be good enough to watch films as you would with a C4 or a G?
It would be. And as soon as the black backing's up there, it's just like a normal OLED TV, really. Not quite as good as G4 or M4, but I'd say maybe C3 level, or maybe B3 level in terms of picture quality. But certainly watchable. You can sit and watch it. But then it kind of takes away, why would you then have that if, you want the transparency, because that's the big, and how do you use that? So, yeah,
that's a gimmick. It's a vanity project. You'd love to have it in your living room, wouldn't you? Though?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, like I say, professional footballers or people with deep pockets are going to have, just to separate rooms or whatever in the house, just so they can say to their mates, "Oh, look at this." The same as rollable OLED was the same thing. It was like, look at this, look what this can do. But once you've seen it work once, then why have you spent 100 grand on something? You know what I mean? It doesn't make any difference in terms of actually watching the TV.
After that, you just want the TV, don't you?
Yeah, but I'm not going to knock companies for this, because, like I say, this is where R&D. This is where they test things out, and they might come upon things that one day, I think myself and Jules would love to have an OLED that came out of the ceiling at 150 inches or 160 inches wide, or in a CinemaScope aspect that you could sit and watch your movies on, because that's the holy grail side of things. That's where you want this, or Samsung to come up with a micro LED, so you can build a screen any ratio you want and have it that way. So I'm not going to knock companies for R&D, but yeah, the usefulness of that is probably for the consumer zero, but commercial side of things, signage, that kind of thing, could be very, very useful. So yeah,
it have implications in healthcare, science, technology.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, Andy. Healthcare is a big market for display manufacturers. They don't really talk about it at shows like this, but certainly some of the closed door demos that I was in, some of the technology that's being developed is being developed for healthcare. It's being developed for surgery and things like that. So you can see three-dimensionally, and you know, you're not being intrusive with the surgery. You can actually plan it properly and so on. So yeah, absolutely. You know, it's not just about watching films.
There was a lot of that at ISC last year of the transparent displays. It was particularly big there. Going back to Barcelona to ISC in a couple of weeks, I expect to see it all again. So it's very, very impressive. Talking about depth, Phil, any glasses-free 3D displays around?
Yes, nothing with any moving objects though. Again, it was just you know, the talking it, you had to stand in the correct place and so on. But it's something that they're clearly working on. I think it's going to take a technology shift for it to actually work. But you know, they're probing, they're looking at it, and they're trying to figure it out again. We're going to get 3D at some point, probably in the next 20 years, because it seems to be in 20-year cycles that 3D happens. So I'm sure it'll come along again at some point, but not at the minute. So talking about transparent OLED T, the signature product, it was so darn good that I gave it our Best in CES award for the transparent OLED T. So I gave that to Dave Sepperson at the suite demo, because I was genuinely blown away by what it could do. It's not till you actually stop and then think about use cases that you think, well, actually, but at the same time, you know, the fact that they're producing these types of products and thinking out the box, I think needs to be rewarded. So it got our Best in Show, and Dave was very appreciative of that. So that was LG and Samsung. So let's move on. Panasonic. They usually, or used to, certainly in the past, have a suite off-site. They decided to be on the stand this year. They were quite cryptic in saying that they are looking at new global markets because they've been pulling out of markets recently. So it was interesting that the TVs were on the stand for everybody to see. Normally that wouldn't be the case, because if it was Europe and Asia only, then they tended to be off-site and not on the American show floor, but they were there. So does that signal that they're coming back to the US, maybe in limited quantities or through certain dealers? I don't know. They wouldn't answer the question, not on record anyway. So again, that's something that's maybe worth keeping an eye on, just to see what does happen with that. And again, it could just be me guessing. It could be absolutely nothing, but I was reading between the lines at what I was being told and thinking, well, that's interesting. But they wouldn't be pushed on anything like that. But anyway, there's 2 new OLEDs being announced. So these are just the flagships, so don't panic. If it's not the flagship you're interested in, there will be other models coming through from Panasonic later in the year. They normally do their launch around about May time, with the TVs turning up June and July. So I expect that will be the time frame again this year. So the Z95A is the flagship MLA TV in a 55 and 65-inch screen size. It has the new Pentonic chip, although they won't call it Pentonic, they call it HCX Pro Mark II AI, mouthful. That's their new processor. It's basically a Pentonic chip. And this is what we've been waiting on, because Panasonic engineers, they in the past have been able to get the absolute best out of OLED in terms of just above black. You'll back me up on this one, Jules. It's the hardest area to get right on the panel, and Panasonic were the best at doing it until they had to move to a previous Pentonic chip from the one that they were using, and it kind of took a little bit of a backward step for a couple of generations. So the excitement here is that they've now have the processing power back again, and hopefully they can do something with it.
Yeah, it's something OLED struggled with from the very beginning, you know, coming out of black, and it's caused all sorts of issues as different manufacturers have tried to, you know, come up with different approaches to the problem. So to be able to get precise rendering of shadow detail on an OLED, if they can crack that and improve on what we've had before, that'll be awesome. You know, it'd be really good. And particularly, you know, you mentioned on the video about Hollywood and being in studios. I'd say in UK studios, when I go around, I only ever see LG OLEDs. And that's a byproduct of the fact that LG allow you to do 3D LUT calibrations direct to the panel. So if they can improve on that, and if there's if the calibration facilities are improved on the Panasonics going forward, they were always very good. very, very good. But if you mention 3D LUTs to colorists, that their eyes light up. So they could be back in UK studios as well.
Yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see what access you get calibration wise. Again, didn't see any of the menus or so on, but the new Panasonic chip does have Calman already built in.
Interesting.
So there is that aspect. So again, that's an area that we will examine as soon as we get the sets in, and when they do the UK launch, and I can speak to some of the engineers. Well, certainly that's one of the routes that and one of the things I'm going to be asking them about is that side of thing. The other TV that was announced was the Z93, I want to say Z93A because it was launched in the States, but the Z93A 77-inch non-MLA. So it does have the heatsink as a proprietary heatsink. It doesn't have an MLA panel. I can only surmise that there is a certain expense attached to them buying those panels from LG Display. And they've done the business case at that screen size and come up with the fact that it was going to be too expensive for their clientele, and they're perhaps not selling as many 77 inches to justify that cost. I don't know. This is me talking. This is not Panasonic talking. I'm kind of guessing as to why it's non-MLA, and that's the only reason I can think of. So if you want a 77 or an 83 MLA panel, then LG are the only show in town at the minute, as far as I'm aware, in terms of MLA equipped. So larger screen size, if you want MLA, you're going to have to go LG. Panasonic's is non-MLA. And again, reasoning is, when I asked him in the video, he was quite vague, Dirk. He didn't quite answer the question. He quite evasive, actually. But again, he's obviously not going to be drawn on the point, but he said 55-65 sells better, and that's where they saw MLA is worthwhile. So reading between the lines, you have to surmise that MLA was probably too expensive on the 77 for them to justify a business case. But anyway, that's the TVs, and I've got to say, Panasonic always excite me when they've got new processing because their engineers are brilliant at what they do. There is great potential in this set, and it looks like a potentially brilliant set. So I actually gave it our best in show for the OLED category because I thought this could be something a bit special. Now, it's not going to be an all-rounder. Panasonic's never are. There's only 2 HDMI 48 gigabit per second inputs, so for gamers that might be an issue. And it's probably not a screen for gamers. The Panasonic, this is picture quality driven. And that's why I gave it the award, because I think this has the potential to look the best this year in terms of picture quality, given that processor, given Panasonic's know-how. The proof will be in the pudding when we get it in for review, but at the minute, potential-wise, that's why it picked up our award for that. Right, let's move on to Hisense. Andy, I think you covered their press conference, didn't you?
Yeah. Took a peek in at the Hisense press conference and the TCL one as well. So both the Chinese companies were pushing heavily on the mini-LED display panel technology for the consumer TVs. And interestingly enough, both claimed to have become, at various points throughout 2023, the number 2 TV manufacturer in the world. So they're obviously picking up various metrics that supported the argument. So there's obviously still a huge market for mini LEDs, which is why they're pursuing those. As far as Hisense are concerned, they introduced new models to both the ULED and the ULED X range, or UX as they sometimes shorten that too. From the top of the range on the UX models, they've got a new 98 and 110 inch models. Obviously, the 110 inch was the one that was getting all the column inches. These both add to last year's 85 inch UX. And the UX range will be coming to the UK for the first time this coming year, this 2024. That's big news. But there was no definite confirmation about which panel sizes will be coming. So we'll obviously see that later on. The 110 inch, then the kind of headline one, features some fairly impressive numbers, 10,000 nits peak brightness and 40,000 dimming zones. That will go some way towards addressing the blooming issue we were talking about earlier on. Now, Phil, you might have a better idea than me. It wasn't really clear in the PR whether the 110-inch was an 8K panel. Is that right? It did seem to be from the floor.
It was quite vague because I was directed away from the 8K to the 110 sitting next to the 8K. So I presume that one was 4K and one was 8K, and I think it's the 4K that's coming to the UK. We're definitely getting the 110-inch.
Right.
I can confirm that because it was confirmed in the video, and if you want to see the video, go have a look at that. Rob went into some great detail on in terms of what the TVs are going to be this year and the feedback that they had from us last year in terms of HDR clipping and so on. They've taken that on board. They've updated the algorithm and how the dynamic HDR tone mapping works and so on. So again, they've been listening. But to answer your question, I don't know because it was still quite vague. If you watch the video, Rob does go through the larger screen sizes. So I think there's 3 variants over 100 inches.
Yeah, the ones he mentioned were obviously the 110 UX, an E7N Pro,
yeah,
which is a full array local dimming model, and the U76N,
yeah,
which is a quantum dot mini LED model, which they had on the shop floor, I think. Filmmaker mode, IMAX enhanced, certified, 144-inch refresh rates, Wi-Fi 6E for improved internet connectivity, and Google TV. So yeah, three over 100 inches. There's obviously talk between yourselves and Hisense about the move towards large screens, but interestingly, he also mentioned that they're increasing their 50-inch mini LED models from 2 to 4 this year. So there's definitely a nod towards the UK market and the fact that we generally have smaller lounges and less space than our American cousins. So it's good to see that a mini LED will be available at the smaller screen sizes as well.
Yep.
So going back to the UX, the top of the range UX models, there's a 98-inch, which you mentioned, that has 5,000 nits and 10,000 dimming zones. Still an improvement on last year's 85. And there was a mention of a 75-inch super slim UX model as well, which is Hisense's thinnest mini LED.
Yeah,
so
we're definitely not getting that in the UK. That's not scheduled for the UK, that one. So our US listeners will be happy to hear that they get that.
No, they seem to get all the
well, they're getting that one.
Brothers,
they're gonna test the waters this year and see if we get that one. But just picking up on some of the things you said there, Andy. So from my visit there, they didn't have them on the stand for public view, but there was the dealer area to the rear of the stand, closed area, where I got to see the US versions of the U6, U7, and U8. They are slightly different to UK. UK go for a bit more value than US, and that's basically in terms of the sound bars. So U8 will have a sound bar again this year, whereas the US version of U8 doesn't have the sound bar.
Yeah, it's a 2.1.2 audio on the UK version, isn't it?
Yeah. So they see that as more as a value and something that UK users value more than just having a panel there. So there are slight changes in terms of cosmetics. But in terms of panel and processing, they should be exactly the same across all the regions. It's just cosmetic changes. And the other change is UI. There are 3 different UI systems used in the States. So Google TV, Fire TV, and I think Roku. Whereas in the UK, it's very much Vida, their own smart TV system. So we'll get Vida.
That's going to include the Freely application now, isn't it, for all TV sets across the UK?
So this was something that kind of passed me by a little bit, and then it was explained to me on the Hisense stand. I think it looks like cracking little technology. So it's IPTV from all the major channels. So BBC ITV, Channel 4, all the major providers. So you can get all those channels without an aerial over IPTV, and Hisense, I believe, are one of the first manufacturers to have that across their range. So
basically
that's
Freeview over the internet, isn't it?
Basically, yeah, and it's a great idea. And Rob mentioned in the video about taking your TV out into the garden and watching the Euros, which is great unless it's a typical British summer and it's chucking it down. But yeah, so that was interesting. The UX is interesting. I really want to get my hands on one of those. I'm probably not 110 inch. I'll probably have to go to Hisense to look at it. I don't think I'll fit that in the house. But we'll come on to larger screen sizes in a bit. But just wrapping up, I also did a little bit on laser TV. It's still a thing. Hisense still pushing it. There were some really nice looking prototypes and models on the stand. Go have a look at my stand tour video for that and you'll see all those. There's also a video with Tim going through the laser TV. The C1 looks like an interesting projector, Jules. So it's a little single chip projector, but it has a blend mode, and if you have two of them together, it blends the image into a much wider aspect ratio. So you could have two C1s and blend them for a 2:3:5:1 screen with enhanced brightness. It looked like an interesting little project. I might have a closer look at that one at some point, or send it to one of the lads to have a look at some point, because it looked really interesting. That's their little entry level projector. It's not an ultra short throw. It's a normal long throw projector, but it had that blending technology, which looked, go and have a look at the video. It looks really, really interesting. And then best of show was given to Hisense for their stand and their product portfolio, because as Andy hinted at, we're talking about larger screen TVs becoming more of a dominant force, but Hisense still have laser TV, so they have two options for you if you want large screen in the home. They also have a full range of white goods, some of them very, very impressive. I've got my eye on a Hisense fridge freezer, actually, because it's got some really interesting, it's got one of these drawers that you can either have it as a refrigerated drawer or a frozen drawer, which I think is a fantastic idea. So you can expand your freezer or you can expand your fridge and little things like that. So they did all that. They also fed me because they had kitchen demonstrations where they were cooking some steak and chips, so we had a little bit of that as well. So
should we be waiting for the transparent fridge, so you don't have to open that? You can press a button and you can see what's inside.
That's a thing. It exists. It's on the market.
It does exist, really.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Samsung will sell you one. Yeah, it exists. You tap the fridge freezer and it goes transparent, so you can see what's in the fridge.
You don't even have to open the door.
Without opening the door, and so you can keep everything nice and chilled, and you just tap on it and it shows you what's inside. Great. That's where transparent makes sense. So yeah, they won best of show for their stand and the product lineup. Right.
Do you know why I feel that there's so last year's were the U6, 7 and 8K ranges, and they've jumped to U6, 7 and 8N range for this year. Any idea why they have shied away from M and L?
No, I have no idea. I've had product lines explained to me this year, and it still doesn't make sense to me what the letters mean. But no idea. It's something to do with year. But I don't know why we've missed 2 and jumped to N. I have no idea why that's the case. We could make up some conspiracy and make it stick, I'm sure. But yeah, not 100% sure on that one. Right, moving on to TCL. Who covered this one? Was this you, Andy?
Yeah, that was me as well. So again, like Hisense, really pushing the mini LED technology for the consumer. And their headline grabbing TV was the largest mini LED available globally now, which is the 115-inch QM89, as it was called at the CES show. That is coming to the UK under the X95 range, where it joins the 85 and 98-inch that are already available. So again, another beast of a screen. This doesn't quite have the impressive numbers of the Hisense 110-inch UX,
but it's bigger.
20,000 dimming zones, 5,000 nits of brightness, which I'm sure for most people will be more than enough. And it uses a new processor, I believe, to handle all these dimming zones. So the AIPQ Ultra is the new chip in that. Again, the rest of the range tended to be US oriented, and they split their TVs into affordable S class and the more QD LED mini LED Q class. And the Q class consists of fairly similarly named Q6, Q6 Pro, Q7M, and Q8 M, which contains the 115-inch. The S Class gets an S5, which replaces the S4. Increases brightness, as do the Q6. They get a boost of about 25-28% in the brightness. The QM7 gets a high zone QD mini LED tech with a high brightness ultra LED backlight, and that obviously gives that a boost for brightness and color. Gets up to 1500 dimming zones and about 2.5 or 2400 nits. Screen sizes from 55 to 98 inches. And there was a 98 QM751G on show from that particular class. The flagship QM89, which you talked about, the 115-inch, that was on the stand as well. So these are all the American versions, and I'm assuming that UK and European versions in some fashion will be coming from those ranges as well.
Yeah, there will be. And obviously, we have our usual video with Marek. Marek's a great laugh. He spends the time, he explains things properly, and
he cuts to the chase, doesn't he? No messing.
Yeah, absolutely, no messing around, and none of this marketing nonsense from Marek. Straight to the point. So yeah, the QX955. I've already tested the 98-inch. I did that in Poland just before Christmas. Had spent a day with it, taking measurements and spending time with it. So it's a very impressive TV, 5,000 nits, as you said, 5,000 dimming zones. The processor's quite impressive. And the impact of sitting in front of a 98-inch TV is something else, especially when it comes to HDR, because it's something that a projector just can't do to that kind of brightness. So that's really impressive, and the 110 is coming to the UK. Now, touching on the UX from Hisense and this X955, Hisense and TCL are affordable brands. They bring technology in at affordable levels, but we're talking here about their flagship products. So don't expect anything but flagship prices for these products. So I don't have anything official, but certainly off the record discussions with various people and not the spokespeople that were on the videos, you're looking at about £15,000 to £20,000 for these TVs. That's the price point that they're going to, because they are the flagship products. Again, that's not confirmed. These were just figures that were being bandied around. So the Hisense was about 18, the TCL about 15. Give or take, and it, again, market dependent and so on. But that should give you an idea of where these sets will sit. These are not going to be the bargains. Now, you can go out and buy a 98-inch TCL TV for £2,000. That product exists. It exists right now. It's not full array local dimming or anything fancy like that, but it is a 98-inch TV at £2,000. So these things do exist at that price point. Where your sacrificing is in the processing is in some of the other features like quantum dots and color volume and all that kind of thing. These are the flagship products. They're not going to be that kind of money, so just bear that in mind. But again, we need these products to come through, so the next generation coming through after that and the trickle down effect that follows on from that will become more and more affordable, and the markets will grow. And it's one of the big growth areas for manufacturers. 50, 55, 65 is so saturated, that market, that they're all fighting over a few pounds difference in terms of the TVs. Where manufacturers are still making decent money, that still props up their businesses, is with the larger screen sizes. Certainly in the US and more so in Europe, we're seeing more and more of these big screen sizes being sold. So yeah, from a TCL point of view, that was the big story. They got a best in show because it is the biggest. And I've tested it, and I know what that TV's like, and I know what the 98-inch is like, and at 110 inches, 115 inches, it then becomes something that isn't available anywhere else on the market, and it's a cracking TV. It's very, very good at what it does, and it gives you that full impact and that immersiveness. So it got a best in show for being 115 inches and being quite a good TV. Hisense is a bit of an unknown at the minute, but we will test that a little bit later on. So as Andy says, in terms of the other TV lineups, so C8, C9, and so on, they will get upgrades. I've actually got a C805 in for review at the minute, a 55-inch, which arrived before Christmas. So that's like a just under the 845, which was a cracking TV. So in terms of their value market, in terms of mini LED and so on, they will be updated this coming year with new processing and updates here and there. So that will come a little bit later down the line, but that was what's shown at TCL. We're not going to get into it in any great detail because we're overrunning as it is, but it's certainly one for the next, I think, TV and display podcast is big screen TV versus projector. I think me and Jules are going to have an interesting conversation on this one. What's your thoughts, Jules?
I've seen obviously these large screens. ISE have had them last year. Technically very impressive. Obviously, compared to a projector, the stats would say the TV, has the better picture, the greater dynamic range. All of that's, you're quite correct about projectors not being able to replicate specular highlights like a TV can. And yet all of that, I still prefer projection. And there's many reasons for that. If you're talking about 115 inches on your wall, it's permanently there. You can get a drop-down screen that will go into your ceiling, and it'll be only there when you need to watch a film. So many people will have a 55, 65-inch TV and a drop-down screen and a projection system too. And so it's not, always staring you in the face. 115-inch TV as well, where you're going to put your speakers. Where do you put your center speaker? On the floor? Real problems. We're trying to tie up the sound with the picture, and having a center speaker on the floor, your left and right speakers, way too far out. Again, it creates a sort of dissonance between the sound and the picture, and you want to tie them up as close as you can. So there's issues there. You can achieve it with a CinemaScope screen of that size. My CinemaScope screen roughly equates to 145 inches of a 16:9. But because I haven't got the black bar area there, I can put my speaker. You could put a speaker underneath that. As it happens, I have a baffle wall system, so my speakers are directly behind the projection screen itself. Reflective technology is kinder to the eyes. Blue light gets absorbed by the screen itself. So I see some people will go for this. Obviously, it's just adding more diversity into the market. But I think the rumors of projections demise are a bit premature.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
And I much prefer a projected image, but
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a market for it, and I think the market that might suffer the most is ultra short throw projection, because you still have to have a fixed screen to get the best out of ultra short throw. And I think that's the market that's most at risk from large screen TVs. What about you, Ian? Would you go for a projector or a TV given the option?
Typically based on my surroundings, I'd generally go for a TV just because I've got far too bright environments. And even if I play in the dark, I'll generally game in the dark anyway, but even then, reflections and the lights coming in, I don't know, it might influence my decision. I'd love to have, game 150-inch projected onto a wall. I can imagine immersing myself in that quite happily. I just very much like to be in a position where I could make the choice. In terms of financially being able to decide between a 110-inch TV or a 150-inch projector, I'll be happy with either. I think I think, like you were saying, there are benefits to both, and I think it might just be might boil down to personal preference in the end as to your own personal surroundings and what you want from it.
Yeah. The other thing that people don't realize initially when you're talking about these large screen TVs is just how heavy they are. They are very, very heavy. That's a 4-man team to get one of these out of a box and set up, and so that gives you an idea of how awkward they are to move. They'll go through a standard door, so there's no issue about getting them in if you have a standard door that does, the door's not on a staircase or anything silly like that, but they will go through a standard door. But yeah, it's a big heavy lump. What about you, Andy?
I think the decision between projection and TV for home entertainment probably comes down to the mindset that you've got. If you're an enthusiast, I think you're probably going to tend towards projection, because part of the whole process is the planning, the looking into the gear, the setup, before you get to that finished product. And obviously, as you and Jules have both said, you prefer that projected reflected image. For most, or for a lot of people, myself included, I think I'd probably tend towards the TV. It's a simpler kind of arrangement to set up. You don't need quite so much planning. It's up and running and ready for you to go almost immediately, regardless of weight and size of room, etc. Just purely from the technology, I think a lot of people will be attracted to TVs as a large screen solution because it's just easy to set up and there's less faffing around.
Yeah. So that was TCL, and moving on to Sony. Now, Sony didn't actually have any TVs on the show floor this year, and there is a stand tour video. Go watch the stand tour video. It's out there. Go watch that. It's fantastic in terms of there's no TVs. It's a big wide open space, but it was still really interesting. They had a lot of the filmmaking gear there. So they had their cameras, their cinema cameras on the show floor. They were showing you how those are used. They had a whole dolly set up with a virtual screen. So if you watch The Mandalorian or, any of these big sci-fi things at the minute where they're actually replacing sets with these massive screens that already have the content on them, so they can be in a spacecraft and, it follows through and they can film it just in a one. They're not having to add the effects in later. So they had something like that. They had a Firebird car, static. It looked like you were driving through the canyons. You could sit in the car, you could line up and have your turn, and they had a full cinema dolly set up where they were moving the camera backwards and forwards and giving you that effect of the car moving through and changing the lighting to match it and that kind of thing. So if you're interested in filmmaking, the stand was excellent. Also had a PS5 section, Ian. I got told off for filming in one of the sections I wasn't supposed to be filming in, but VR demos, all that kind of thing. And again, you could line up and just play along, and they had Gran Turismo in one section, Last of Us 2 in the other section, which is the section I got told off for filming in, and the whole VR side of things as well. So really interesting stand. They did have they call it a black box or black room demonstration. So I was the only journalist there it was the final session of the day. It was over at the Mirage Hotel in one of the ballrooms, but I got shown their the predecessor for the X95L mini LED TV. It was a prototype. There was not a lot of information given out because this is still pretty hush until there's the launch event, and I don't have anything to tell you that I don't think they want me to talk about anyway. So basically, it was an explanation of how they've changed the backlighting system, the local dimming system, to suppress blooming, but also to make sure black levels are deeper, that they can be much finer gradation in terms of black to white. So we're talking about that really bright object against a black background. They're really working on that in terms of they're using their own driver units for the mini LEDs. And they wouldn't give any of the technical details. So again, I'm surmising here, but they could basically narrow it down to almost a per zone area and introduce more gradation in terms of light output within each of these micro LED clusters. And what they showed was the front of the screen gone, so you could just see the backlight system working. That against last year's model. And the difference was astounding. It really was. The amount of gradation, the amount of fine tuning that they can do in terms of between black and there being some light in each sword was incredibly good. It got me excited. Now, it's not going to be perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect display. It's not going to be at the per pixel level that OLED is. But what they're promising is twice as bright, but twice as much dynamic range. And this is the important thing. This is what we're talking about right an hour and a half ago at the beginning of the podcast. That dynamic range being compressed because of blooming suppression. What Sony are saying is that they can now manage it to such a level that is going to get better. And you're going to have more dynamic range, which gives you a better image at the end of the day. And it gives you the ability to have more in terms of your average picture level. And if studios are going to start grading higher nit levels, so at the minute, everybody's kind of around about 1,000 nits, but these displays are coming to market now that are 2,000, 4,000, and Sony's next big thing is their new grading monitor, which is 4,000 nits. This is why they're also developing the technology for the consumer TV, because what they're saying is, look, we're a studio, we make these things, we film them on our cameras, these movies, we then grade them on our equipment in the studios and in the grading suites, and you're going to see it on your TV, and what they want is lens to living room. That's the line that they see, and that's their marketing anyway. But I was so impressed with this demo, and I'm kind of difficult to please these days, because I think I've been doing this such a long time and gone to all these launches over the years and all that, and you hear everything, and then when you actually get the product, sometimes it doesn't quite live up to the hype, and we've been promised improvements in different areas and so on. But genuinely, I was excited that I thought, actually, this could be something that moves the game on, not massively. It's not going to be a huge game changer and using all the usual jargon that some YouTubers and journalists like to use, like, oh, this is a game changer. No, but it's definitely an improvement on what's gone before, and it's if it does give you a 50% incremental change in terms of how the local dimming works and how that affects image quality at the end of the day, I'm all for it, absolutely. And I think it looks,
it's quite interesting, Phil, then, that something which has caught your eye so dramatically is not really a new technology. It's an adaptation of an existing technology. So it does show that there's still advancements to be made with what we've got already.
Yeah, absolutely. And people were telling me 2 years ago or 3 years ago, OLED's dead. OLED can't get any brighter. It's dead. Well, look at where we are now. 3,000 nit brightness. Yeah, okay, that's not quite a D65, but it's better than the 500 nits that we had 4 years ago. And the same with mini LED. For a long time, Samsung were the only game in town with mini LED. They were the only ones still making investment. But then you got studios who are demanding that they have a certain level of equipment, and you have manufacturers like Sony who own a studio then saying, well, actually, we make the grading monitors. They're going to use this technology. Why don't we then spend some money and develop this and make it look as good as our studio monitors? Because we're developing it for the studio, we may as well trickle it down into consumer. And yeah, this is where things get me excited, when companies think, well, hang on a minute, we've got this, we've got that. Why don't we just rethink this, think a little bit out of the box? What can we do to improve this? And Sony's answer is that they've got a semiconductor business as well. Let's build a little drive chip, and it's a tiny little chip, and there's loads of these on the backlight panel, and each of them is responsible for their own little area of the screen. And if you've got a driver on board that you can then command to do different things, and it has a better level of gradation in terms of the brightness output that it can do to improve your local dimming, then fantastic. That's going to be not a game changer, but it's going to be a big improvement in what we've got already. And for those of us who live in brighter living rooms or brighter environments where OLED, because it's a glass front and it doesn't go quite as bright, might not be the ideal screen for that environment, this could be a very good solution for those film fans who want to see things but don't quite have the surroundings to watch in a reference environment. And it's something we've touched on in the past, Jules. We'd always suggest that people try and have a reference environment, but listen, none of us live in grading studios.
Yeah, and that's why when we calibrate, we do a demo for people as well, because there are practical uses where you want to watch the TV with the lights on. It's yeah, I mean, I'd still argue that an LG G3 from last year has has plenty of brightness for a bright room. So I think what we're seeing here is we talked about a lot of product, a lot of different technologies. There's such diversity in the marketplace. There isn't the perfect product for one. There doesn't exist, does it? The perfect TV does not exist. So you're going to have to make individual choices, and there's something there for everybody.
So yeah, Jules, we're this year, next 12 months, because we've got the TV podcast, we're going to go over this type of thing in great detail. We're actually going to go over each technology, and then you as a listener or a viewer will be able to figure out which TV technology is actually best for you, given your circumstances, what you want to watch and so on, because there is no perfect TV in that respect. And before we wrap up on Sony, it was so impressive, this demo, and it takes a lot to impress me these days or get me excited, because, 20 years of this stuff, and
cynical.
Yeah, you do get a little bit that way, and you just think, yeah, okay, yeah, it's usual marketing. But this actually genuinely looks exciting, and it has me excited for the new TV. So it was Gavin McCarran. Those that are familiar with our videos and so on, you'll know Gavin as Sony's rep in the UK. It was Gavin that took me through the demonstration, and he got our best in show for Best Product Innovation, which is the new backlight and local dimming system from Sony, which we're really excited to see in a product this year. Right, so let's wrap up, because this is the feature-length CES edition. Podcasts going forward in future are going to be 30 to 45 minutes long. So, but there's a lot to get through, even just the TV side. And this is what I was on about with CES. There is so much to talk about that we just had to stick to one subject matter here just to get through everything it was interesting to see. There's two products I want to just quickly mention before we wrap up. They're both audio products. So the first one is SVS. They launched their Ultra Evolution speakers. Ian, quickly run us through those.
Yeah, clues very much in the name, that they're an evolution over the original Ultra speakers from, I think, just over a decade ago. They're just adding a few more models and obviously upgrading the technology. So there's now 3 floor standing options, the Pinnacle, Titan, and the upgraded Tower floor standing speakers. There's the bookshelf option, which also comes in a smaller nano variety. You've got the elevations, which offer you Dolby Atmos surrounds if you need them, along with the dedicated center channel as well. I think we had US pricing starts at 5,000 for the Pinnacle, 4,300 for the Titan and Tower. The bookshelves are around $1,299, with the nano elevation center at $899. I think there's a few discrepancies. I think some outlets were reporting some prices, and in the interview that you gave, the gentleman sort of quoted slightly different prices. And also the launch dates. Some people are saying February. I think more mid to late March could be on the cards. But yeah, they should be very, very interesting. Like you mentioned, it's a bit of a soft launch, but a lot of hype around and kind of pushing to hit the green light a little bit early, perhaps.
Yeah, and I had a demo, which a bit unusual. It wasn't a closed room demo. It was actually on the show floor, just with some fake walls built around it. So it wasn't an ideal situation to be in. But even so, they managed to pressurize that area quite nicely, and the effects were really nice. Time delay, the technology we're talking about. Some people agree with it, some people say it's snake oil or whatever. All I'm going to say is they sounded very, very nice. And when you're talking about the price points they were at, certainly they are punching the weight, because they were, I think you could put them up against speakers costing twice, maybe 3 times the price. In terms of the build, the look, the design, and the sound quality was very, very good. And again, that's on a show floor, so getting them into an actual proper listening room and so on, I'd be very interested in doing that, because just from the short demo I had, they were very, very impressive speakers. So go watch the video and get a little bit more into that, and you'll see the demo facilities and so on, and a little bit more about those speakers. The other interesting product, Ian, quickly go through this, and then I spoke to the CEO, so I can maybe add a little bit more to it. But Canvas, this was originally a startup which failed. They went away, they figured out what worked, what didn't work, and they've relaunched and come back again.
Yeah. Basically, it's, I mean, as your headline said, it's not a soundbar. It's kind of like it's basically designed as a hi-fi system for your TV, so it's doing the job of a soundbar, but with a slightly more original setup. Basically, it's a 55-inch speaker system. It's a pair of 6.5-inch base mid-range drivers, a couple of 29mm silk dome tweeters in there as well, and that little 55-inch pack is designed to sit perfectly under a 55-inch TV. If you've got a larger TV, you just change the grill on the front, so you can get it to align with a 65-inch, 75-inch, or 77-inch TV. So it's a perfect companion for those TVs. Obviously, it'll work with other TVs. It just means that the grill will stick out a little bit more either side. Class D amplification inside, obviously geared towards use with a TV, but there's also no reason why it could work equally as a standalone hi-fi system somewhere else in the house if you just wanted to wall mount the setup in a kitchen, bedroom, or anywhere else. They've got some of their own sort of integrated 3D technology in there for that sort of, added surround sound. There's room correction as well. And basically it'll cost you around, I think it's only in euros, the pricing I saw is about 3,000 euros.
Yeah.
The size doesn't matter because you're only paying for the different grill. So regardless of your TV size, it's not going to cost you much more either way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it looks very, very interesting. So
it's got
to
me
hear how it
excited.
sounds.
Got me excited. It got me excited because I think I saw the PR come through, and then Andy gave me a push and said, "Have you seen this?" And I had a little bit of a closer look at it because I'd never heard of the company, and they were well aware that I'd never heard of the company because they were still pretty low key and they're trying to get the word out. So I spent some time with the CTO, who's Kim, and he's the gentleman who was on the interview, and it's quite an in-depth interview. So you want to find out more about the company and how they developed the product and how they came back to market again, having learnt some lessons and so on. And they were very honest about, why things failed in the past, and they had a rethink and a relook and a relaunch, and this is the product they've come back with. The interesting thing for me is it has back 3D on board. Jules, have you heard of back 3D? They're very, very high end. No. There's very, very high end audio processing, and basically what it does is it cancels out the sound from the right speaker going into your left ear. So right speaker only goes to right ear, left speaker only goes to left ear, and it uses the technology to cancel out the crosstalk, as they would call it. And their suggestion is that by doing that, it then opens up a much wider sound stage. And the reason that they're using it is because a 55-inch speaker that fits with a 55-inch TV, the drivers are pretty close together. And it was described to me as if you were to put a mattress from your nose down the center line of the TV and between the speakers, and if you did that, all you would hear would be right to right and left to left. But they can do that without that mattress being there, just with this back 3D processing that's on board. And my God, it works. It really does work. It's fantastic. It's a lot of money. And it's one of these products that it's only going to interest a few people. It's only people with, deeper pockets, or who are maybe a little bit more interior design led in terms of the choices. It's not a sound bar. It's a really nicely sculpted hi-fi speaker with all the drivers just in one box, but then they are separated out. Each has their own chamber, and everything is done the way you would expect it to be done. It's really inert, so you can tap on it, you get the density that's there, and so on.
Did it increase the sound stage?
I'm just coming on to that, Andy.
Like a surround sound as well.
No, I'm going to come on to that because this is the trick. So the trick is that this processing, it gives you the wider sound stage. So when you're sitting in front of the TV, and there's quite a wide sweet spot, but there is a sweet spot because this technology has to work. It has to cancel, the sound from each ear and the crosstalk that causes that. But sat in front of the TV, it was like two floor standing speakers being, 7 or 8 feet apart and towed in. That's the effect that you got, and it disappeared. So all you had was this wall of sound in front of you with perfect placements of the sound in a stereo mix. So I listened to some stuff that I'm very familiar with, stuff that I used to test speakers and so on. So it wasn't just their demo and they were, jazz tracks and, the type of thing you get at Bristol show where they'll only play a certain type of music because it complements their speaker. I was basically allowed to put anything I wanted through it. So I listened to Blade Runner 2046, the opening. Doesn't get sub bass because you're only talking down to 30 hertz, but it still had really clean, deep bass, an amazingly wide soundstage. Now it's not 3D, it's not like having surround speakers or anything else like that. It's not using psychoacoustics. It just gives you a really nice widespread, a really dynamic sound, and you can pick out every little thing within the soundstage. So it's very, very impressive, and it's aimed at a certain area of the market, and I think it's a growing area of the market. And I've discussed this a couple of times on the podcast where people are downsizing. You're going from 712 systems or 714 systems, and actually after COVID, people are thinking about their living space a bit more and what they want from their audio systems and so on. And people are either going 2-channel or, they're buying into these new amplifiers with e-arc, so they can have their TV through a couple of speakers and still have that nice full range sound, but without all the clutter. The ingenious thing with this is it works on a Visa type stand where the TV sits on top of the speaker, and then you can have it absolutely perfectly aligned. So it looks like just one big thing on this. It looks amazing. And then you've got these magnetic grills, and you can have any design you like on there. So there was one I really liked, which was an wood oak strips, which is the fashion at the minute. A lot of people putting oak strips on their walls and that kind of thing for helping with sound absorption and that kind of thing. And it looked fantastic. So if you're looking for something that looks great, gives you the same level of sound that 2 floor standing speakers, say £2,000 floor standing speakers would give you with a decent amplifier. It's all built into one box. You're getting that effect. It works with all the streaming services. You can feed audio in if you want to. You can connect a turntable up if you wanted to. As a package, as something for that type end user, it's fantastic. It really was good. Is it worth €3,000? Yeah, probably. I wouldn't tell you how to spend your money. Would I go out and buy one? Possibly. And fingers crossed we get one in for review. They've promised one, so hopefully we do get one in for review, and I can spend quite a bit more time with one and actually live with it for a little while, because I think it's a really genuinely interesting proposition, and it ties in nicely with TV, which is what this podcast is all about. It's something that sometimes we bang on about picture quality and picture processing and so on. Sometimes we forget about the sound side, and sound's 50% of the experience. So yeah, fantastic product. Go check it out if you can. They are very limited in terms of outlets at the minute. It's very much a sales channel through them. But yeah, check it out. Go check out the website, check out the product. Like I say, fingers crossed we will get a review sample in, so I can spend some time with it and actually figure out exactly what was going on, because CES is one of these shows where you get demo after demo after demo, and you like to reflect a little bit more about what you've actually heard. But that really impressed me. It really got me excited. So yeah, wanted to talk about those two. So that wraps it up for our CES edition. It is a bumper feature length edition, but there was so much to get through, and I hope all of you out there have gotten something out of what we've seen, what we've discussed. And of course, there's 19 videos from CES out there as well. So go watch all 19 of those videos, because we spent a lot of time producing them, and hopefully you get a lot out of those. Stand tours were new for us this year, and only made possible by camera technology improving. I made that with a Osmo Pocket 3. We bought a combo pack a couple of months ago just to try out as a possible camera. It's got a 1-inch sensor. It's been fantastic. The picture quality was amazing. It blew me away. And we made the stand videos with those. It came with a microphone that I've just attached myself and walked around with the camera on the stand. So give us a feedback on that. Was that something that was genuinely interesting? Because not a lot of people get to go to CES. So did it give you a flavour of what the show floor was like and what it's like to go around these stands? Give us your feedback below, or in the thread, or via email. And that's it for the CES podcast special tonight. My thanks to Andy, Ian, and Jules. Thanks very much, guys. So the next AV Forums podcast will be the movies edition. We're spoiling you going forwards, because there's going to be 2 editions of the movies podcast. We're splitting them out into movies and streaming, and then physical media, so 4K Blu-ray and Blu-ray editions of the podcast. That'll be the 29th, Monday the 29th of January, and both of those goes live at 7 p.m, the normal time on a Monday. And that's the thing this year, you're going to have a podcast every Monday. So if you're looking for the AV Forums podcast, it's a Monday night, it's 7 p.m, it's on YouTube. Go and check them out. And we are splitting them up as well. So there's going to have a TV podcast, you're going to have home AV, you're going to have hi-fi with myself and Ed and guests, you're going to have the movies and streaming and the 4K and Blu-ray. So you're going to have something every Monday. And that also allows us to have special guests and special features and actually plan out the year in terms of what we're going to show you guys going forward. And that could be things from how to set up your TV and, should you buy a turntable? We're going to answer all those questions for you this year going forward with the various podcasts. But that's it for the moment. You can obviously go buy us a coffee or buy me a coffee /AV Forums if you think we're worth it. If you think we're worth a coffee, you can do that. And of course, you can do all the cliched social media stuff across all the platforms. You can like, you can click, you can subscribe and ring that bell. That's it. My name is Phil Hinton. I'm not reading this. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Good night.